this wedding company that I work for, Journeys of the Heart, and the retreat director played this wonderful, wonderful song called Bring Them All In, Bring Them All In. I don't know if anybody's ever heard it. It's by a British or a Scottish musician named Mike Scott. So the refrain goes, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring in the little fishes, bring in the sharks. Lift them out of the darkness and stand them in the light. Bring in the exiles, the unredeemed, the unforgiven, and lay them at my feet. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in. When I visited Bud last Sunday, we had this very brief discussion about God's presence and action in the world. And we both wondered how the awe and the glory and the wonder that is God, sunny skies, thunderstorms, newborn babies, misbehaving adolescents, all came to be seen in some punitive way, so that God became a horror, a you better watch out type of guy, instead of a lover and a creator. How did we Christians become mired in sin and darkness and punishment, instead of walking in the light and laughter and happiness and encouraging everyone else to do the same? How did salvation came to be seen as a one rules and regs, and obedience to those whom I sincerely believe, or they sincerely believe, were set above the rest of us, rather than an unlimited exercise in joy and love? And suffering, as we all know, is a terrible thing, which at some point in time, all of us will probably have to come to grips with. At some point, we have to come to terms with suffering and learn to accept it, and perhaps even learn from it. And some of you who are sitting here are intimately acquainted with the type of suffering that Bud and Cass are going through right now. Some of us might choose to suffer in order to preserve our integrity, just as Jesus did. However, suffering, the kind described in our first reading and hinted at in our second, should never, ever be something that we seek or inflict upon others or expect as a punishment for anything or a repayment of some sort. Because suffering is not a divine requirement, a highway to divine approval or a badge of honor, but rather a very sad part of the gift that we call life. God does not expect us to harm ourselves or others as a part of divine service. Rather, we are to live life and to live it abundantly. Suffering is something to be alleviated at all costs, rather than to be explained away by stories of a suffering servant or inviting people into the suffering of Jesus as the preferred way of attaining God. And by the way, these passages in our first reading do not refer to Jesus at all. The prophet Isaiah is reading about the suffering of Israel while Israel was in exile in Babylon. And there is no indication that that suffering servant had agreed to the suffering that is described or offered it up as recompense for sin. It was just the fact that Israel was suffering while that the group of people were in Babylon. Modern biblical scholars will advise us not to use the Old Testament as a proof text or a prediction for the new, in spite of what has been done in the past, because prophets of any age really do not predict the future. Rather, they interpret the present. They describe in prophetic language what is happening in the world and in society all around them. I think you would all agree with me that Jim Chittister and Simone Campbell are prophets, modern prophets. And I think you all might agree with me that there is probably not even one prophet in Rome. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. We know that all human beings are equally loved by our God, who, as Paul wrote, does not have favorites. We are all part of one body and all part of that vast eternal tapestry that we call creation. No one sits at the right hand or the left hand of God, mostly because God doesn't have hands. But also, God doesn't sit on a throne. God does not have a royal court or spies or messengers. And God God doesn't keep a laundry list of our sins. Rather, all of us, the unredeemed, the unforgiven, the sharks as well as the fishes, live in the capacious, magnanimous heart of God. About 10 years ago, I had this wonderful dream. It was the best dream I ever had in my life. And the next day, I actually sat down and wrote it all. And it got lost in one of the computer thingies that happens to everybody. But I was still able to remember it because it is as vivid today as it was 10 years ago. And I'm going to describe this dream because I think Bud would agree with it. In my dream, I was in this lovely garden with 3 other women. And the day was one of those beautiful spring days with warm sunshine and no humidity, the kind of day that makes you want to sing or maybe run to the beach. The air was fresh and it smelled of lilacs and the deep, dark, fertile soil that's just waiting to give birth to summer. The cherry trees were heavy with pink blossoms, and red and yellow tulips splashed their color up against the wall that surrounded the garden, and there was a gate at the front and a gate at the back. I recognized 2 of my dance partners, and some of you might recognize them as well. One was Monica Armstrong, who's an artist who has worshipped with us in the past, and also another friend, one of my friends from WAC, Mary Whalen, who also has been with us occasionally. Mary is always working on a committee to make the world a better place, so she always carries a carry-all bag. So in my bag, in my dream, she's carrying the bag, and Monica's carrying a paintbrush. And I think I was carrying a pen. And I have no idea why these 2 women were with me and not some other people that I had known at the time. And I didn't know the 3rd woman, but she was a very, very large woman of indeterminate age, with thick blonde braids piled up on top of her head. And she was dressed in some sort of Swiss Miss outfit, which kind of gave the whole picture a sense of incongruity. And I was thinking quite guiltily, even in my dream, that she was the fattest woman I ever saw in my whole life, and I had never seen anyone built so grotesquely. And I remember feeling guilty as I was thinking this in my dream. So the 3 of us carried pennants or flags of some sort. And although I don't recall hearing music, the 3 of us began to dance. And we were swinging the flags over our heads and kicking up our heels and laughing uproariously. And I remember thinking that the blonde woman was remarkably nimble for her size. And it seemed to me that we could have danced forever. Or maybe we were dancing forever, I don't know. And I remember feeling so very happy, and Monica and Mary and the other woman seemed to be happy as well. And the dance just ended much too soon. And at the conclusion, the large woman gave each of us a hug. As she approached me, I could see her kind and gentle face and her smiling eyes. And I felt terribly guilty about thinking what I had thought about her. But it didn't matter. I knew I was instantly forgiven for my ungenerous thoughts. As she took me into her arms, I realized that she was not flesh and blood at all. But her support was made of some sort of scaffolding like a dressmaker's model. And when she pulled me close, almost inside of her, although I could have been inside of her, I don't know, I could see that inside was the universe and the spinning galaxies and the sun and the moon and the stars and all of creation. And for too brief of a moment, I was a part of it. Or maybe it was eternity, because I don't know. And she whispered in my ear, if indeed it was a whisper, perhaps it was a shout. And she said to me, never forget from whence you came. And God, for then I realized that surely she was God. She gently extricated me from the generous and glorious story of creation. She kissed me on both cheeks, her eyes shining with love, and sent me on my way. And Mary and Monica and I danced out of the garden, waving our flags above our heads. And as I looked back, I could see thousands of hundreds of all people at the other end of the garden, waving their pennant and waiting for their chance to dance with God. Now, but that's okay. For all too soon for us, our beloved Bud will spend eternity dancing in the heart of our joyful, glorious God, in whom
shared with us so freely and so lovingly.